pretty good, but there's a couple of problems. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll know whether those problems are a deal breaker for you. Now, full disclosure, I was flown out to LA by GGG and I got my hands on what I think is about as close to an early access build as I was realistically gonna get, like a month or so before it released. It was an awesome event. I met a bunch of Diablo 4 content creators because it seems like that's most of the people that were there, but I'm not really the type to take like a bunch of photos or videos or anything. I kind of just like to be like in the situation, absorbing all the information, and I'm writing stuff down, trying to just experience the twice now in a lifetime event where my favorite video game company flies me out for my favorite video game to play it and experience it before everybody else. So I figured that GG has like a full media team there, and they'll probably take at least one photo of me that I can use, right? Like just one. And they sent the album over to me, and the one photo of me in this entire album, which was sent to essentially everyone, is this. I straight up look like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I look like I have a terminal case of scoliosis. Dude, I look like I'm like that 115-year-old man that they found in a cave and they like dragged him out and he was literally about to like break in half. I'm like straight locked in gamer mode, but there's no actual game in front of me. I'm just trying to watch the event and see in between the two people that are in front of me. But yeah, don't I look great? So the Mercenary, I want to focus less on builds right now and more just kind of like general trends that I feel, because there were a few people playing Mercenary, like particularly Havoc was playing a more grenade style build where I was playing a icicle / fragmentation style build. I'll talk a little bit about those in a bit, but it's not really the main focus of this video. I'm sure there's going to be quite a few different builds that will work for the Mercenary, and they'll have varying degrees of success, but realistically, it's the systems with the crossbow that I want to talk about in this video. So I personally made it pretty far. I was one of the furthest in the group. I mean, it was mostly Diablo 4 players and only a handful of PoE people there. I made it, like, I think maybe about a fourth of the way into Act 3. Havoc was playing the Mercenary as well, and he was playing a grenade build. He made it to what we think is the halfway boss of Act 3, but I spent like the last 45 minutes to an hour of the event walking around trying to get like the vibes that everybody felt about the Mercenary, and most people kind of had the same feeling. With pretty much everybody that I talked to that played the Mercenary, at least somewhat, some names off the top of my head that I remember was Havoc, Empyrean, Subtractem, and quite a few Diablo 4 people. Pretty much everybody said the same thing, in that like the first 20 or 30 minutes of playing the Mercenary is frankly kind of awful. So much so that I'm pretty sure Subtractem said that he started the Mercenary, got to like the first boss or two, and then was like, wow, this is bad, and literally re-rolled right then and there, because this was like a time-sensitive situation where it's like, you kind of just got to go, you kind of just got to make a build and choose something and play, especially if you want to be able to see like the end of Act 2 and Act 3 and all that kind of stuff. So pretty much everyone was like, yeah, this doesn't feel great. As for the people who actually like pushed through and kept with the Mercenary, most of them said it eventually started to feel pretty decent regardless of the build that they played, but those first few steps were pretty rough. Now you might wonder why like the sentiment about the Mercenary was so universal at the entire event, and it's because of the ammo system. It's because of the reloading system. When you are very early on in the, I'll call it like the crossbow system, you notice right away how slow and kind of clunky the whole crossbow system itself feels. And the problem with this is that you have separate buttons for loading ammo into the crossbow and then firing the ammo from the crossbow. Now, once you've loaded a type of ammo, it automatically reloads and you only have to hit the one button to fire it. But if you're using multiple types of ammo, especially as you start getting into the combo system in Path of Exile 2, then it gets to this point where it's like you're pressing one button to load ammo, and then you're pressing another button to fire, and then you're pressing a different button to load a second kind of ammo, and then you're pressing that same fire button again, and you kind of have to just go back and forth. And most of the time when you're playing an ARPG, you get this kind of feedback system where it's like you press a button, you see a noticeable effect happen in the world around you, like I pressed this button, I shot an arrow, it killed something, right? But with this, it really doesn't feel that way. You get out of about 4 or 5 button presses, 2 instances of some kind of like visceral feedback that you are impacting the game in front of you. And when you combine that with relatively slow reload speeds early in the game, it can be a little bit rough. Now, I know I've talked a lot of doom and gloom about the crossbow system, but I do want to emphasize that this is genuinely only like the first 20 or 30 minutes at most. If you are a faster player and someone who can move through the game at a pretty decent pace, this won't be a problem for a very long time. Very early on, you're gonna have access to like reload speed increased nodes on the tree, as well as nodes that like give you a percentage chance to not consume a bolt every time that you fire. And then also around, I think like 7 or 9 or something like that, you get access to a support gem that gives you more ammo in each clip. So there's ways to deal with it, and it's not that bad once you get there, but I'm hoping at least a little bit that GGG does find some way to make those first 20, maybe 30 minutes a little bit less painful. I don't know if they just have to like reduce the base amount of time that reload takes and then modify the nodes on the tree a little bit just to make it a little bit more even. But yeah, those first couple minutes are rough. So what about after you make it through all of that? Once you push through, once you get to the point where, you know, you're in like Act 2, Act 3, you've got your combos together, you know, you're firing multiple abilities and they're all interacting. How does the actual character feel once you've gotten there? Honestly, pretty good. In comparison to what I played last time as the monk and what I saw a lot of other people play, one big thing that I noticed with the mercenary is that I felt significantly more confident in moving past enemies and killing them while running. I know a lot of the melee classes and even some of the minion classes and such, they get this kind of feeling where you encounter a pack and you kind of just have to deal with it. You can't run past it, you can't ignore it, you just have to fight it. With the mercenary, I felt much more so than on the monk that I could just kind of skip stuff if I wanted to. I could run past it and I could fire behind me as I kept moving. I felt like I had the tools where I could impact the environment with either like icicles or stun grenades or things like that. So if I got in a really bad position, I had tools to be able to deal with that. Whereas a lot of the time on melee or other classes, it doesn't really feel like you have tools to impact the environment or impact the mobs that are directly surrounding and on top of you. If you get surrounded and you don't have any of those tools, in Path of Exile 2, you kind of just die. There's not really much that you can do there. You don't really get like blink abilities. You don't really get anything like that. You just have the dodge roll. Now, you do get access to some other things that they talked about, like there are items that give you like a blink and things like that, but it doesn't really seem like they want you to have huge access to being able to go through enemies at any given point. They want you to have to deal with the fact that if you get surrounded, that's a mistake that you've made and you pay for it with your life. So talking a little bit about builds, I tried pretty much all of the different skills up to a certain point. I wasn't able to play a lot of the skills that you get in Act 3. I just simply didn't find the little gems that you can cut into the different skills. I only found one of them. And eventually I landed on a build that uses fragmentation rounds as well as glacial bolt. Fragmentation rounds is one of the first types of ammunition that you get, and essentially what it does is it does a large spread of ammo out across the screen, and if you're very close up front to the enemy, those rounds can shotgun. So you're allowed to do this kind of trade-off where typically as a ranged character you're safer when you're at range. However, with fragmentation rounds, if you give up that safety and go close to the enemy and use that ability, you can hit them with a whole bunch of them because, well, it does shotgun. On top of that, it knocks enemies back, and it does have some, I think, natural pierce built into it if I remember correctly. So very early on, I was mainly using this ability as my main DPS alongside an ability called Flash Grenade. Flash Grenade's only purpose really was to build the stun bar on bosses and like stun smaller enemies. So if I got into a bad spot, I could toss down a flash grenade, stun all of the enemies around me, push them back out of the way, and roll through a big group of enemies if I got surrounded, which made me feel relatively safe most of the time for like Act 1 and portions of Act 2. Flash Grenade was really good at building up the stun bar on bosses, so you'd get that like 3 to 5 seconds of being able to just be right up in front of their face, hitting them with all of those shotgun bullets and just annihilating their health bar for a little bit, and then backing off, you know, firing from range if you have to, because some bosses are safer up front, some bosses are safer far away. And then eventually around the end of Act 2, early Act 3, I started using this secondary ability called Glacial Bolt. And what this does is it fires on the ground or at an enemy, and it makes kind of this V shape of these ice crystals. And the way that these ice crystals work is that if you fire fragmentation rounds into the ice crystals, they explode into an AoE. On top of that, they reveal a support gem called Fortress, where if you have some kind of effect that makes a shape on the ground, Fortress instead makes a giant circle on the ground. So what I ended up doing is I used Glacial Bolt with Fortress, made a giant AoE of these ice crystals around an enemy, and then used fragmentation rounds to explode them and kind of do this like shotgun effect. Once I actually figured this out and got it going properly, because most of the way through Act 2 I wasn't really doing it right, I was just kind of like flailing around figuring things out. But as I got into Act 3, I got the proper gear for the build, I got the proper skills, I started doing some pretty serious damage. I went from like struggling on white mobs and blue mobs and such to almost one-shotting blue mobs and taking like a third to half of the health of random yellow mobs. It ended up being pretty strong. And it kind of reinforced in my mind this feeling that combos and combination skills in Path of Exile 2 are going to be super important. There are going to be builds where you can just press one button and you don't have to worry about it, but the more that I see of it, the more that I experience of it, it does feel like these combinations of skills are the intended way to play this game. You're meant to do things like create a puddle of oil on the ground that you then ignite with something else, and that causes damage over time. That's kind of what Havoc was doing with his build, where he made it all the way up halfway through Act 3 in the amount of time that we had, which was like 6, maybe 7 hours. So I highly suggest when you start, embrace the combinations because they are so powerful. It is multiple times more powerful than just stubbornly trying to use one ability over and over and over and over again like you would in PoE 1. Most likely, unless something changes drastically, I will be playing this fragmentation rounds, Glacial Bolt, some kind of build revolving around this in the actual early access. You can look forward to at least a basic build guide about that from me as soon as I have access to all of that information. Out of the abilities that I was able to interact with, that seemed the coolest. It seemed like the most fun for me, but I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of other abilities and such. I would suggest that early on with Path of Exile 2, you kind of stick to the guardrails that they give you, because while there is infinite depth and breadth that is available in Path of Exile and Path of Exile 2, early on, we're really not gonna know exactly what works and how it works. It's probably a bit safer to stay kind of a bit more in those confines for at least your first build. We can do the crazy stuff later. If you have any particular thoughts about the Mercenary or questions that you want to ask, let me know down in the comments. I try for at least like the first day or two of a video coming out to answer as many questions as I can. So if you've got any like burning desires about the Mercenary, let me know down there. And make sure to like the video if you liked it. If you want more PoE 2 content, I'm going to be making a ton of it, so make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that little notification bell to stay up to date with all my latest videos, and stay safe out there in Rayclast, and I'll see you guys in the next video.